I found the receipt in his car on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between the seats where he thought I'd never look. A Powerball ticket purchased the day before he asked me for a divorce. The winning numbers matched perfectly, $28 million. And my husband of 14 years had hidden it from me so he wouldn't have to split it. Let me explain how I got to that moment, sitting in his BMW, with a crumpled gas station receipt in my hands, realizing that the man I'd loved since I was 23 had betrayed me in the most calculated way possible. My name is Lauren, and I'm 37 years old. My husband, David, is 41. We met in college, got married young, built what I thought was a good life together. We live in Connecticut, in a nice colonial house, with a 2-car garage and a yard that needs constant maintenance. No kids. We'd tried for years, spent thousands on fertility treatments, and eventually accepted it wasn't going to happen. That was hard on both of us, but I thought we'd gotten through it together. David worked in finance, made good money, around $250,000 a year. I was a high school English teacher, made about $65,000. We lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. We saved for retirement, took one vacation a year, drove nice but not luxury cars. A normal upper-middle-class life. 3 weeks ago, David came home from work and asked if we could talk. He had this serious expression, and my first thought was that someone had died. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, and he told me he wanted a divorce. No warning, no couples therapy, no explanation beyond "I'm not happy anymore." I was blindsided. I asked him if there was someone else. He said no. I asked him what changed. He said nothing specific. He just didn't want to be married anymore. He said we'd grown apart. He said we wanted different things. All the cliches people use when they're lying about their real reasons. I cried. I begged him to reconsider. I suggested counseling. He said his mind was made up. He'd already talked to a lawyer. He wanted to keep things amicable, split everything 50-50, and move on with our lives. He said he'd move into the guest room while we figured out the details. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work. My friends tried to be supportive, but what do you say to someone whose husband just decided to end a 14-year marriage with no real explanation? My sister Rachel kept telling me something was off, that people don't just wake up one day and decide to divorce their spouse for no reason. She said I needed to dig deeper, figure out what was really going on. But I was too heartbroken to be suspicious. I just wanted him to change his mind. I kept trying to talk to him, trying to understand, trying to fix whatever was broken. He was distant and cold, like I was already a stranger to him. About a week after he asked for the divorce, his behavior got weird. He was constantly on his phone, smiling at messages, taking calls in private. He went out more, claiming he was meeting friends or working late. The classic signs of an affair, except something felt different. He wasn't defensive when I asked questions. He was almost giddy, like he had a secret that made him happy. One night, about 10 days after the divorce bomb, he came home late. He'd been drinking, which was unusual for David. He was a 2-beer maximum kind of guy, but this night he was buzzed enough that he fumbled his keys and laughed at himself. He was in such a good mood it made me angry. How could he be happy when he'd just destroyed our marriage? I asked him where he'd been. He said out with friends celebrating. Celebrating what? I asked. He caught himself, sobered up a bit, and said celebrating nothing, just blowing off steam. But the slip was there. He was celebrating something. The next morning, I noticed his car was a mess. David was meticulous about his car, always kept it clean and organized. But the passenger seat had fast food bags and coffee cups scattered around. It was so unlike him that it stuck in my mind. A few days later, I needed to move my car out of the garage so a repair person could access the water heater. David's BMW was blocking mine. He was at work, and his keys were on the hook by the door. I grabbed them and went to move his car. That's when I saw the receipt. It had fallen between the seats, just visible if you looked down into the gap. I don't know why I pulled it out. Curiosity, maybe. Or the paranoia Rachel had been feeding me. It was from a gas station, dated 3 weeks ago. The day before, David asked me for a divorce. Along with gas, he purchased a Powerball ticket. 5 numbers were printed on the receipt, along with the Powerball number. I took a photo of it with my phone, not really sure why. When I got back inside, I looked up the Powerball drawing from 3 weeks ago. My hands were shaking as I typed the numbers into the lottery website. They matched, all of them. The jackpot was $28 million. Lump sum payout would be about $18 million before taxes, probably around $11 million after. And David had won it the day before, asking me for a divorce. I sat on my kitchen floor and everything clicked into place. This wasn't about growing apart. This wasn't about being unhappy. This was about money. My husband had won the lottery and immediately decided to divorce me so he wouldn't have to share it. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, meaning marital assets are divided fairly but not necessarily equally in a divorce. If David won the lottery while we were married, that money would be considered marital property. He'd have to split it with me. But if he could delay claiming it until after the divorce was final, if he could hide it long enough, he might be able to argue it was separate property earned after the marriage ended. That's what he was doing. He was playing the long game. He'd hidden the winning ticket, filed for divorce, and was waiting until our divorce was finalized to claim his prize. Then he'd be free and clear with $28 million all to himself. The betrayal was so calculated, it took my breath away. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or a moment of weakness. This was premeditated. He'd seen those numbers come up, had probably felt elation for about 30 seconds, and then immediately started planning how to cut me out of the winnings. I sat on that kitchen floor for over an hour, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and throw things and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that was learning to be suspicious of the man I'd trusted completely, told me to wait, to think, to plan. I called Rachel. She was the only person I trusted completely. I told her everything. And she was silent for a long moment before she started laughing. Not happy laughing. Angry, bitter laughing. She told me I needed a lawyer, not the collaborative divorce mediator David had suggested we use. A real lawyer. Someone who could help me figure out how to prove what David had done and make sure he didn't get away with it. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Patricia Huang, and she specialized in high-asset divorces. Her office was 40 minutes away, far enough that David wouldn't accidentally run into her. When I explained the situation, she was quiet for a moment before asking if I had proof. I sent her the photo of the receipt and explained when the ticket was purchased. She asked if David had claimed the prize yet. I said I didn't think so, that he'd been acting like we were having a normal divorce, suggesting we split our assets 50-50. Patricia explained that lottery winnings were absolutely marital property if won during the marriage. It didn't matter that David wanted a divorce. It didn't matter that he hadn't claimed it yet. The ticket was purchased while we were married, making it a marital asset subject to equitable distribution. But here was the complication. If David hadn't claimed the prize yet, we couldn't prove he'd actually won. Anyone could have a receipt for a lottery ticket. We needed proof that he still had the winning ticket, or that he'd claimed the prize and was hiding the money. Patricia asked if I'd seen the actual ticket. I said no. She asked if David kept important documents anywhere specific. I told her he had a safe in his home office, but I didn't know the combination. She advised me to do some detective work, but carefully. I couldn't break into the safe or do anything that could be construed as illegal, but I could observe his behavior, document anything suspicious, and wait for him to make a mistake. In the meantime, she said, I should play along with the divorce. Act like I believed his story about growing apart. Be agreeable about splitting assets. Sign nothing, but appear cooperative. If David thought I was going along with his plan, he might get sloppy. So that's what I did. I became the perfect soon-to-be ex-wife. I told David I understood, that I wanted what was best for both of us, that we should handle the divorce maturely and fairly. I agreed to use his suggested mediator. I acted sad but resigned. David seemed relieved. He actually thanked me for being reasonable. He said so many divorces turn ugly, and he was glad we could do this differently. The whole time he was lying to my face. I smiled and nodded. We attended our first mediation session 2 weeks later. The mediator was a pleasant woman named Susan, who specialized in uncontested divorces. She explained the process, had us each list our assets and debts, and started discussing how we'd divide things. David was generous. He suggested we split our savings accounts and retirement funds 50-50. He offered to let me keep my car and some of the furniture I'd picked out. He even said I could have our dog, a golden retriever named Bailey that we'd gotten 5 years ago. I played along. I suggested he keep his car and his office furniture. I said we should sell the house and split the proceeds. I acted like this was all perfectly normal, like my husband wasn't hiding a $28 million lottery win from the mediator and from me. Patricia and I spoke after every mediation session. She was building a case, preparing for the moment when we'd reveal what David had done. But we needed more evidence. The receipt wasn't enough. We needed the actual ticket, or proof he'd claimed it, or something concrete that would hold up in court. I started watching David more carefully. He was out a lot, often coming home late. His phone was always with him, and he'd changed his passcode so I couldn't access it. He was hiding something, but I couldn't prove what. Then, about 3 weeks after I found the receipt, I got lucky. David left his laptop open on the kitchen table while he took a shower. He was usually so careful about logging out, but this time, he'd forgotten. I had maybe 10 minutes. My heart was pounding as I opened his email. I searched for anything related to lottery, Powerball, winning. Nothing. I tried his documents folder. Still nothing. I was about to give up when I checked his photos. There it was. A picture of a lottery ticket, taken the same day as the gas station receipt. The numbers matched exactly. And there was another photo, dated 2 days later, of David holding the ticket and smiling. He'd taken a selfie with his winning ticket like it was a trophy. I forwarded both photos to my own email, deleted the sent message from his sent folder, and closed the laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I heard the shower turn off upstairs, and forced myself to move to the living room, to act natural, to breathe. David came downstairs in sweatpants and a t-shirt, grabbed his laptop, and headed to his office. He had no idea I'd just found the proof we needed. I called Patricia immediately and sent her the photos. She was thrilled. This was exactly what we needed. Photos of David with the winning ticket, taken while we were still married, before he'd even asked for a divorce. It proved he knew he'd won, proved he'd hidden it, and gave us ammunition to argue that his entire divorce filing was fraudulent. Patricia explained our options. We could file a motion immediately, expose what he'd done, and demand the lottery winnings be included in the marital assets. But that would alert David that we knew, and he might panic and claim the prize immediately, potentially moving the money somewhere we couldn't track it. Or we could wait. Keep playing along with the divorce process. Let David think his plan was working. And then, at the final mediation session when we were supposed to sign our divorce settlement, we could reveal everything. Confront him with the evidence in front of the mediator and his lawyer, back him into a corner where he'd have to either split the winnings 50-50 or face serious legal consequences for fraud and asset concealment. I liked the second option. I liked the idea of David thinking he'd won, thinking he'd successfully fooled me, and then watching his face when he realized he'd lost everything. Patricia cautioned me that this was risky. David might claim the prize before our final mediation. He might realize his photos had been accessed. He might get suspicious of my suddenly cooperative attitude. But if we could pull it off, if we could trap him in his own lie, we'd have tremendous leverage. We decided to wait. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to live with David, knowing what he'd done, and act like I believed his lies. I had to attend mediation sessions and discuss splitting our modest marital assets, knowing there were $28 million he was hiding. I had to smile and be reasonable, while rage burned inside me. But I did it. I played the part perfectly. I even started talking about my plans after the divorce, mentioning that I'd probably need to get a roommate since teacher salaries didn't go far. David actually offered to help me with first month's rent on a new apartment. The audacity was stunning. We scheduled our final mediation session for 6 weeks after David had first asked for a divorce. This was the session where we'd sign our settlement agreement, officially dividing our assets and agreeing to the terms of our divorce. After this, we'd file the paperwork with the court, wait out the mandatory separation period, and then be officially divorced. David had no idea what was coming. The morning of the final mediation, I met with Patricia 2 hours early. We reviewed our evidence and our strategy. She'd prepared a motion to file with the court if David didn't cooperate, alleging fraud and asset concealment. She'd also prepared a settlement proposal that included the lottery winnings split 50-50, accounting for taxes and fees. If David agreed, we'd amend our divorce settlement to include the lottery winnings and close the case. If he didn't agree, Patricia would file the motion, and we'd take this to court where David would face serious consequences, not just financially, but potentially criminally, for concealing assets in a divorce. I was terrified. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Rachel came with me for moral support. Waiting in the car outside the mediator's office, Patricia squeezed my shoulder and told me I was doing the right thing. David was already there when we arrived, sitting in the conference room with his lawyer, Mark, and the mediator, Susan. He smiled when he saw me, that fake friendly smile he'd been giving me for weeks. I smiled back. We started with pleasantries. Susan reviewed the settlement agreement we'd been working on. Everything was divided cleanly. The house would be sold and proceeds split. Retirement accounts divided. Savings accounts split. No alimony, since we'd both been working. Clean break. Susan asked if we were ready to sign. David nodded eagerly. This was it. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Once we signed, he'd wait a few months, claim his lottery prize, and disappear into his new wealthy life without me. I looked at Patricia. She nodded. I took a breath and told Susan we couldn't sign yet. There was an asset that hadn't been disclosed. The room went very still. David's smile faltered. Susan looked confused. Mark, David's lawyer, asked what asset I was referring to. Patricia pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. She explained that 3 weeks before filing for divorce, David had purchased a Powerball ticket. That ticket had won the jackpot, $28 million. and David had failed to disclose it in any of our financial declarations. David's face went white. Mark looked at him sharply, clearly blindsided. Susan's professional mediator expression cracked into shock. Patricia slid copies of the receipt, the photos of David with the ticket, and the Lottery Commission's confirmation of the unclaimed prize across the table. She explained that lottery winnings during marriage were marital property, subject to equitable distribution. By concealing this asset, David had committed fraud. David started stammering. He said he hadn't claimed it yet, that he wasn't sure if he was even going to claim it, that he'd forgotten about it. The lies tumbled out desperately. Mark cut him off. He asked for a recess to speak with his client privately. Susan agreed, looking completely out of her depth. This had gone way beyond a simple divorce mediation. Patricia and I went to a separate conference room. She was calm, confident. She said David and Mark were probably discussing their options right now. They could fight it, force us to go to court, but the evidence was overwhelming. David would lose. And worse, he'd face potential criminal charges for asset concealment and fraud in divorce proceedings. Connecticut took that seriously. Or David could accept a revised settlement that split the lottery winnings fairly. After 30 minutes, we reconvened. David looked defeated. Mark looked angry, probably realizing his client had lied to him throughout this process. Susan looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Mark spoke. He said his client disputed some of our characterizations, but was willing to discuss a revised settlement to avoid litigation. Translation: David knew he was caught. Patricia laid out our terms. The lottery winnings would be claimed by David within 30 days. After taxes, the net proceeds would be split 50-50 between us. David would pay for all legal fees associated with revising the divorce settlement, and there would be a non-disparagement clause, preventing either of us from discussing the details publicly. David tried to negotiate. He argued that since the ticket was purchased with his money, from his paycheck, he should get a larger share. Patricia shut that down immediately. Marital funds were marital funds. Connecticut didn't recognize separate ownership of income during marriage. He argued that he'd found the ticket after we'd emotionally separated, that the marriage was already over in his mind. Patricia pointed out that emotional separation had no legal bearing. The marriage was intact when the ticket was purchased and when it won. The money was marital property. He even tried to argue that splitting it 50-50 wasn't fair, since I'd contributed less financially to the marriage, due to my lower salary. Patricia actually laughed at that. She said, if he wanted to argue about fair contributions, we could depose all his friends and family about who'd done more housework, emotional labor, and fertility treatment management during our 14 years together. David shut up after that. Finally, after 2 hours of back and forth, David agreed. The revised settlement would include the lottery winnings, split 50-50. After taxes, we'd each walk away with approximately $5.5 million, plus our original settlement of split retirement accounts and house proceeds. Susan drew up the revised agreement. Patricia reviewed every word. I sat there watching David sign his name, watching him give away half of the fortune he'd tried so hard to keep for himself. When it was done, when we'd both signed and the agreement was filed with the court, David looked at me with pure hatred. He asked how long I'd known. I told him I'd known since 2 days after he'd asked for the divorce. I'd found the receipt in his car almost immediately. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to use it. He called me calculating. He called me manipulative. He said I'd deceived him by pretending to go along with a divorce, while secretly planning to take his money. The irony was apparently lost on him. Patricia gathered her papers and told David he should be grateful we weren't pressing criminal charges. Concealing assets in a divorce was fraud. In Connecticut, it could result in the concealing party losing their entire share, plus criminal penalties. He was getting off easy. We left the mediator's office with our signed settlement. Rachel was waiting in the car, and when I told her what happened, she screamed with joy. We went to dinner that night, the three of us, Patricia included, and celebrated. The next 60 days were a waiting period. David had to claim the lottery prize, which meant doing a press conference at the Lottery Commission. I watched it online. He looked miserable, holding a giant check for $28 million and trying to smile for cameras. The reporters asked what he'd do with the money. He said he'd split it with his soon-to-be ex-wife as part of their divorce settlement. He sounded bitter. The money was transferred to an escrow account managed by our lawyers. After taxes, after fees, the total net was about $11 million. We each received $5.5 million. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. We never spoke again. I heard through mutual friends that David moved to California, bought a house in San Diego, and started investing in tech startups. I hoped he was miserable, but honestly, I stopped caring pretty quickly. As for me, I kept teaching for another year while I figured out what to do with the money. I bought a smaller house, paid in cash, invested the majority of the funds with a financial advisor. I started a scholarship fund for students who couldn't afford college. I traveled, something David and I never did much of because he was always too busy with work. And I learned to trust my instincts. Rachel had been right. Something was off from the beginning. David didn't just wake up one day and want a divorce. He had a reason. A $28 million reason. And if I hadn't found that receipt, if I hadn't investigated, he would have gotten away with it. I think about that sometimes. How many people get divorced and never know there were hidden assets? How many spouses successfully conceal lottery winnings or inheritance or other windfalls? How many people walk away from marriages with far less than they're entitled to because they trusted the wrong person? I trusted David for 14 years. He was my husband, my partner, the person I thought I'd grow old with. And the moment something valuable came into his life, his first instinct was to figure out how to keep it away from me. That tells you everything you need to know about what our marriage actually was. People ask if I'm bitter. Honestly, no. I'm grateful. Grateful I found out who he really was. Grateful I had the presence of mind to gather evidence and plan strategically instead of confronting him immediately. Grateful for lawyers like Patricia who know how to fight for their clients. And grateful for the settlement that gave me the financial freedom to build a new life on my terms. The $5.5 million is nice, don't get me wrong. It's life-changing money. But the real prize was realizing I deserved better than a man who would betray me so completely for money. The real prize was learning that I could be strategic and patient and ultimately victorious when someone tried to take advantage of me. David thought he was so smart, hiding that lottery ticket and filing for divorce. He thought he'd planned the perfect crime, but he underestimated me. He underestimated how much I'd learned about him over 14 years. And he underestimated how motivated I'd be once I knew the truth. The look on his face when Patricia put those photos on the table, when he realized I'd known for weeks and had been playing him the entire time, that look was worth more than any amount of money. That was the moment he understood that I wasn't the naive, trusting wife he'd married. I'd become someone who could match his deception with strategy and come out on top. So yes, I found the lottery ticket receipt in his car. Yes, I discovered my husband's plan to divorce me and hide $28 million. And yes, I played along until the perfect moment to strike back. Some people might say that makes me calculating or cold. I say it makes me smart. And in the end, I got exactly what I deserved. Half of the marital property, including that lottery win, and freedom from a man who valued money more than our 14 years together. The system worked. Justice was served. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't anger or confrontation. Sometimes it's patience, evidence, and a really good lawyer.